and welcome back to Book Lust. I'm Nancy Pearl. My guest today is Priya Parmar, who is the author of 3 absolutely wonderful novels, and I'm so happy that finally she's joining us here on Book Lust. Priya, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really have been looking forward to this for a long time. So your new book is called The Original. I've been thinking about how to describe this book, and one of the ways is very obvious, but I don't think it really tells the whole story, which is a fictional biography of Katharine Hepburn. But how do you think about what you do in your 3 novels?
I don't know if it's a fictional biography as much as because it's I mean, that's sort of biting off more than I could chew. That's a whole life, whereas I'm trying to tell a very specific story. I try and find, I don't know what it's about before I start. I just start the research, and then I hope that a story is going to step forward and feel like this is the story that needs telling. This is the urgent story. This is where the pulse is. This is, all of those things. And I've gotten lucky 3 times that feeling has happened where it's, okay, this is the actual story. So it's more, I'm telling a kind of a very particular slice of a life that is that basically takes us to the icon that we remember.
Oh, that's good. That's good because I'm going to be talking about this book a lot over the next year. So I wanted to get it right. I mean, because to say, as you're saying, a fictional biography both kind of narrows it and expands it way more than this wonderful book that we have that I just love.
Can I just say, you've been such a kind and wonderful and unbelievable advocate for my writing. And I mean, I literally was jumping up and down when they said that you wanted me to come on. I was just so thrilled because you've been so kind about my writing from the very beginning, and I appreciate it so deeply.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's just wonderful to find an author that you could really count on for both a good read and just beautiful, beautiful writing. So after this, you won't need any compliments for about 15 minutes because I will have heaped them on you. So the 3 subjects of your 3 novels are Nell Gwynn and Vanessa and Virginia Woolf, and now Katharine Hepburn. How did you choose those 3 women?
They all came to me in completely different ways. Nell Gwynn was one of the people that I had researched in my PhD, and she just didn't really leave me alone. Vanessa Bell, I read a letter of hers that she'd written and Virginia Woolf, I read a letter, a couple of letters that they had both written, and their voices just didn't leave my head, and they just haunted me, and I felt that falling down the rabbit hole feeling of wanting to know more and wanting to know more, and that's, to me, that's always the big green flag for a book. And then Katharine Hepburn, I was watching Philadelphia Story with my mom, and it's one of my favorite films, and I'd seen it so many times, and she and I had watched it together so many times. And she said out of nowhere, this was her comeback movie. And I was really surprised because I was like, come back from what? She's always been on top. She's won more Oscars than any other person in the acting, when was she ever not on top? Because you don't ever think of Katharine Hepburn not being on top. And I started Googling, and I just immediately was completely hooked. And I realized slowly, with kind of half excitement and half dawning horror when it's a person from history who you really love, and you're like, oh my God, this is going to be my next book. I'm going to have to write about this person who scares me so much. But that's always, where the good stuff is, when it scares you a whole bunch.
So, how did you? Your books are so filled with people and facts and the settings. I mean, and they just seem so real to me. How did you? How did you go about your research? Because it wasn't just Googling. I mean, I mean, I picture your writing room, wherever it is, with just 3x5 cards all over the walls, by movie or by person, that kind of thing. How did you go about it?
That's actually very true. I mean, I have all over the walls. They're still up. But so I think because my background is in academics, I love primary documentation. I love primary research. I love anything I can get my hands on that's in their own voice. So I start there. I start with letters. I start with, if I'm lucky, diaries. But, in this case, there were David Selznick wrote a ton of memos, which almost read like a diary. So I read just widely, not knowing where the story is, but just as much primary documentation as I can. And then I start to read the secondary sources and everything else. But then I also love to go to the places, because I think just sort of a magic chemistry happens when you go to the places where they actually lived. You see things that are small details that would never make it into a book, but they're really important, to you, to understanding the landscape that you're writing about, to understanding what that person might have been going through or feeling or doing or anything else, and when in the scenes that you're writing. So I go to the places, and then I just read and read and read and talk. And in this case, I was able to also watch her films. This is the first time I've been writing about someone where I knew what she sounded like, which is in so many ways terrifying, because you've got to be able to capture that iconic voice, which is not like anybody else's voice. So
Yeah, yes. And because there's so much film of her, you were able to capture the physicalness of her and the way, for example, that she walked.
yes.
You mentioned that in the book. And I could get a picture in my head of what she looked like without even, it was just there. She was
Oh,
like, she was there with me when I was reading the book, as was Vanessa Bell, because I felt when I read Vanessa and her sister, I was just blown away by how you had captured both of their voices. And I'm an older sister, and my younger sister is very accomplished. And I just identified with Vanessa Bell so much. And I remember telling people that, if you're an older sister, you will really understand the relationship in this book so
yep.
much. And I guess I guess your great, what I would describe as your great talent, your just amazing ability to get inside these women and give us a totally believable story. I mean, when you write, the reader finishes your books believing that it's like there was a tape recorder going and this is what they said.
That's the biggest
Yeah.
compliment there ever could be. That's the most wonderful thing, because that means it rings true, and that's what I try, so hard to accomplish. I try to make it ring true. And that can mean heartbreaking decisions of, having a line that you love, that ends up on the cutting room floor because it's supported by infrastructure that doesn't ring true, and so it needs to go, or it's a great line, but it doesn't work here, so it just means that that all those really difficult decisions all along the way were worth it if it rings true. Like
Yeah.
that's what I most want.
Yeah.
But it takes, for me, it means I just have to be kind of really, really ruthless in terms of the editing, in a way that's tricky when you've spent all this time, writing it and then taking out and taking out and taking out. I cut about, oh goodness, I cut at least 100 pages.
Was there was I think there was like 10 years between Vanessa and her sister and the original, which did not seem like it could possibly be that much, because I remember my reading experience so clearly of Vanessa and her sister. But were you searching for another topic, another woman?
I also, I took time away from writing novels to write for the stage. I wrote
Oh,
a show on the West End. I co-wrote a show called Sylvia, about Sylvia Pankhurst, which is touring in the UK right now and is headed to the Royal Albert Hall. Um, but so I did that. But really, I I had sort of snuck up on the idea of writing about Katharine Hepburn, and I had a big chunk of it. Um, and then, COVID hit, and it was really, um, I got, I wouldn't say I got stuck. I would say I got a bit, because I couldn't go to California and I couldn't walk around the places and I couldn't, do the things that I normally would do right at the start of the research. I kind of had to approach it differently this time, and it was really hard. I got stuck. And so then eventually I could go to California and I could do
Right.
those things, and then it took off like lightning. But
Yeah.
so I would say it was a combination, and I was also, I was taking care of my father who passed away. So I was also, there was life stuff, and then there
Yeah.
was
Right.
COVID stuff that
Life.
we all went through, and then there was work stuff. So it was like a big combination. But I couldn't believe it had been so long, and it
Yeah.
was,
Yeah.
yeah.
One of the things about the original that I thought was so interesting were all the people, was the portrayal of Hollywood in the 1930s, and all of those names that are so iconic, and the way Katharine Hepburn interacted and reacted to all of those, David Selznick and Irene Selznick and John Ford and Howard Hughes. I mean, honestly, in your research, did anything surprise you in your reading?
So much, so much. I mean, I didn't know that she had the life that she had growing up. I didn't know that she'd come out of this, terrible trauma as a child. I didn't know that she'd come from a life that had so much trauma on both sides. I didn't, all of those things were a complete surprise to me. I didn't know. Um, I didn't know that, she had been, when I started this, I didn't know that she had been married. Before I didn't know any of, there was so much that surprised
Yeah.
me. And then they all had these, Cary Grant also had a life that I just didn't see coming. I had no idea about, I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to give things away, but so much in his life I did not guess was coming.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, there was so much that was surprised, and to the point where, I, as a novelist, you're not usually having the problem of, nobody's going to believe this if I say this is the truth, and nobody's going to believe these
Right.
things. I'm going to have to, how do I scale back the drama? Even
Yeah.
though it's all real life. So it was, which is an amazing problem to have as a novelist. Terrible for her to live through, but an amazing
Right.
problem to
Right.
have as a novelist.
I thought that. So I knew nothing. I mean, really nothing about Katharine Hepburn. I had, read some books about Hollywood in the 1930s and the Hays Code, and the way there was, and but I never dreamed that she and Howard Hughes had a relationship,
I know. And
big
a
relationship.
big relationship, a life-changing
Yeah.
relationship. And it's so I didn't know she'd had that, but I also I didn't know that Hollywood was the way that it was. You think of Hollywood in the 1930s, and before I did all of this research, I imagined a place that was, you know, conservative, straight, like, just all of the things that you imagine the 1930s, to be. But in actual fact, it was, bohemian. It was incredibly liberal. It was progressive. It was, open marriages, and people have, same-sex relationships were not only not uncommon, they were, nobody batted an eye. It wasn't the way that you think of the United States in 1930s to be. And it was just this incredible moment in time. And they were all this, everybody was in on that sort of agreement to protect that ecosystem. The press was in on it, the studio, everybody was sort of keeping the secret that Hollywood was this incredible liberal place at that time. And it was all a surprise to me.
And the hugely ironic part of that is that while they tried to keep everything, it was putting on a show for the people who were going to be watching the movies, that the way Cary Grant or Katharine Hepburn lived was not this picture perfect, idyllic American way of life. I'm sure it still goes on, but it was to such a degree.
And um, and she had such an unconventional family in so many ways. Her mother was a huge in the suffrage movement. Her father was, an early advocate for education about venereal disease. It was just the discussions that were happening at the Hepburn dinner table were not ones that you imagine the 20s and 30s to be. So she starts off there, and then she goes to Hollywood, which is just this really, heady, free place at that time, which was just a real joy to write. It was wonderful to be able to write that, and that it was so heartbreaking that those were sort of like the last few minutes of that time, and then the Hays Code sort of brought the end of that liberal period.
Right.
Yeah.
You sort of fall, what the reader, I think, kind of falls in love with these characters. I mean, even Randolph Scott. I never ever thought of, I don't think I would ever, I knew I knew the name, and I knew he was a movie star, but I don't think the name Randolph Scott ever came to me or ever would. And then he turns up in your book, and there he is. And Howard Hughes, you humanize him in a way. I think when I was telling somebody about this book, he told me, he said, yeah, you know how he died and you know what condition he was in when he died. But, which is true, and you talk about that, but Howard Hughes has this whole other life, you know, before that. And well, what, I don't think I'm giving anything away, but Kate ends up with this beautiful emerald diamond ring. Is that ring still in existence?
She kept it until she died. It was among her belongings that were auctioned. I think it was Sotheby's that auctioned it after she died. But so she kept it all of her life. He meant that much to her. And the way she spoke about him, you know, to the end of her life was with such love. You know, we
Yeah.
all know about Spencer Tracy and the romance that happened there, but the way that she loved Howard
Right.
Hughes was just clearly incredibly, incredibly meaningful. And the way that, you know, what happened to his life, you know, in the very sad sort of descent into you know, addiction and OCD and all these terrible things that he suffered at the end of his life. That you're right. That beginning part when he was, you know, young, when he was healthy, when he was totally on top as a filmmaker, as an
Right.
aviator, you know, all of these things kind of get lost. And there's so much more to him than just the obsessively driven, you know, aeronautic engineer. There's so much more to him. He adored her. You
Yeah.
know, he just
Yeah.
clearly, and they clearly adored each other.
Yeah.
And the way that she treated his deafness, I think that once I understood how she approached his deafness, because she comes from a medical family. So it
Yeah.
was not something, you know, to be, I'm so sorry, I have a dog behind me who's just wiggling around.
That's fine.
Who you know, the way that she treated his deafness was, I think, unlike anyone else in in his life, and it freed him. I think it gave him, um, you know, a way of being in the world that didn't have any shame attached to it,
Yeah.
which was wonderful. And I think that's one of the reasons he just, you know, was crazy about her.
Yeah. Yeah. Are you thinking about, I know you're going to be busy with, you know, publicity and everything else with the new book, but are you thinking about another woman?
I'm circling 3 at the moment, and I don't know where it's going to land. um, I don't know how it's going to go. And what's weird is that I've never actually had that happen before. I've always known really early on, like, okay, that doesn't work. Okay, that doesn't work. And then when I know, you know, it's scary, but I know. Um,
Right.
in this case, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not
Yeah.
sure yet. And it's been such a joy to write her. Um, and you know, I I I've been living with her longer than I've been living with anyone else I've written about. But I'm really struggling to let her go. I'm really struggling to let that whole world go. You know, it's tough. You sort of get homesick for this fictional world that you've built, and you
Right.
want to go back,
Yeah.
and you find that
Yeah.
you know, your gate key doesn't work anymore, and it's upsetting.
Right.
So
Yeah, no, I mean, because I've been thinking about who I would like you to do. Um, I couldn't come up with anybody that was as vital as the people that you have chosen. Um, but I'm going to keep working on it, and if I can think of somebody, I will get in touch with your publicist.
no, get in touch with me. I'll give you my email. I would love to hear from you about absolutely anything.
I did want to give you one quick fiction recommendation if you haven't read it, but maybe you came across it when you were doing the Mrs. Pankhurst play. There's a novel called Old Baggage by a British writer named Lissa Evans. and the main character is one of the early suffragettes and what they went through. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful novel. I do think you would really like it.
I don't know that one. I'm going to write that down. Lisa Evans. Okay.
Lisa Evans, and it's Old
Okay.
Baggage. Yep.
Amazing. Amazing.
Okay.
Amazing.
Wow, I gave Reader's Advisory to, did that for Priya Parmar.
I would love that. I would love that. And absolutely. And I'm always looking for, I mean, it's, if you really do come across someone you think, oh, this would be great to write about, please tell me. Because it's really hard to envision how it's gonna go, and you never know if readers are gonna gonna connect or not. And
Right. Yeah.
and you always seem to be really, have your finger right on the pulse of that. So
Thank you. Thank you. Well, Priya, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's just been a real treat for me to get to talk to you. And I look forward to rereading the original, your brand new book, and now I feel like I need to go back to the earlier two, which will give me great pleasure in rereading them too. So thank you, and right on.
I will. I'm on the case. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much for having me.
You're very welcome.